Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with new tensions in the Caribbean. The Cuban Coast Guard has shot and killed 4 people on a speedboat registered in Florida. Cuba's government says the 10 armed people on board were Cubans living in the U.S. who plan to enter the country to fight the government. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. will conduct its own investigation.
It is highly unusual to see shootouts in open sea like that. It's not something that happens every day. It's something, frankly, that hasn't happened with Cuba in a very long time. But we're going to find out. We're not going to base our conclusions on what they've told us.
Secretary of State Rubio spoke to reporters last night, and we get more from Bloomberg Deputy Washington Bureau Chief Laura Davison.
This is hitting at a really critical moment between U.S. and Cuba tensions. You know, there's been a U.S. embargo of oil to Cuba for several weeks now, and the island is really facing an economic crisis as there's major energy shortages, and the country is essentially running out of money.
And Bloomberg's Laura Davison reports Cuba's Interior Ministry says the U.S.-flagged boat opened fire on Cuban security forces within 1 nautical mile of the province of Villa Clara. A U.S. official told the New York Times the people on the vessel were trying to get relatives out of Cuba, and no U.S. Navy or Coast Guard ships were involved.
Let's get to some new developments in the Middle East, Nathan. U.S. and Iranian officials are meeting in Geneva today for the latest round of nuclear talks. And we get the very latest with the Bloomberg Middle East correspondent Jumana Bercecci.
There is a glimmer of hope. The fact that these negotiations are going ahead is perhaps a positive sign. I will tell you that expectations are very, very low in terms of securing a breakthrough. But the U.S. has been applying a lot of pressure on Iran the last couple of days, not just with that huge military buildup, all of the verbal comments from President Trump. He even mentioned Iran in the State of the Union, and the latest round of sanctions and some of those entities that are linked to Iran as well in the last 24 hours. So there is a lot of pressure on Iran to come to the table and agree to some form of a diplomatic resolution with the U.S.
And Bloomberg's Jumana Bercecci says Tehran's priority in the talks is the lifting of sanctions that have hobbled its economy.
Well, Karen, the U.S. is vowing to maintain high tariffs on China hours after Beijing warned against any future hikes. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer says President Trump wants to keep tariffs on China steady at a range of 35 to 50%. Overall, the U.S. has imposed a 150-day 10% global tariff following the Supreme Court defeat for the president. Greer tells Bloomberg the president wants to bump up that tariff rate.
We'll put out a supplemental proclamation that the president will sign, going to 15% where appropriate. Remember, before the Supreme Court struck down the tariffs, a lot of these countries had agreed to have tariffs, U.S. tariffs on them of 18%, 19%, 20%. So going up to 15%, for them, at least temporarily, it's better than the deal that they had.
U.S. Trade Rep Jamieson Greer says President Trump will be in Beijing at the end of next month to discuss extending the tariff truce with China. Get the full conversation on the new Bloomberg Video Hub. It's at bloomberg.com/videos.
Now let's get to the latest on the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, Nathan. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are set to face questioning from lawmakers about donations to the Clinton Foundation boosted by Epstein. And Bloomberg's Amy Morris has more from Washington.
The Clintons are expected to testify before a House panel over the coming 2 days. They'll be sworn in. They have to answer questions under oath, and they initially refused to appear. They finally agreed after months of negotiations. House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer says they have a lot of questions.
One of the questions that we all have in both parties is how was Jeffrey Epstein able to surround himself with the most powerful people in the world?
House Oversight panel Democrats will brief the media after those depositions. The Clintons say they're being selectively prosecuted by Republicans on that committee. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. And separately, the Justice Department says it'll look into whether it improperly withheld documents from its Epstein files. That announcement comes after several news organizations reported that records involving uncorroborated accusations from a woman against President Trump were not among those released to the public.
Well, let's turn to the markets now, Nathan, where a rally in stocks is stalling following NVIDIA's latest sales forecast. The dominant maker of artificial intelligence processors did deliver profit and first quarter outlooks that easily beat analyst estimates. The chip maker said fiscal first quarter revenue will be about $78 billion, and that was more than $5 billion above the average analyst estimate, but it did fall shy of some of the loftiest projections. Matthew Bloxham covers NVIDIA for Bloomberg Intelligence.
In isolation, it is a great number, and it's really strong growth year on year. But I think you have to put it in the context of where NVIDIA is right now in terms of the overall market perceptions and where the share price is. It's a $4.7 trillion company. There's a huge amount of forward growth baked into the share price. And these numbers, even though they on paper beat the average analyst expectation, I think that the whisper numbers, so were kind of higher.
And Bloomberg Intelligence's Matthew Bloxham says NVIDIA still faces uncertainty in China. For now, the company will continue to exclude data center revenue in China from its forecast. And right now, shares of NVIDIA up more than 1.5% in early trading.
Well, software stocks could be under pressure once again this morning, Karen, following earnings from another former high flyer. Bloomberg's John Tucker joins us with more on that. John.
And Salesforce gave a lukewarm outlook for sales growth, Nathan. The leading maker of customer management software, or software as a service, SaaS, Salesforce has become a poster child for Wall Street worries about the impact of AI. The company says revenue is going to be about $46 billion in the new fiscal year. That forecast is in line with analyst estimates, but it is not impressing investors. Shares are down close to 4% pre-market. And the CEO, Mark Benioff, he doesn't sound too worried. He says this is not our first SaaS-pocalypse, as he puts it. Well, the San Francisco-based company shares, they're down about 27% this year, alongside competitors like Intuit, Workday, and ServiceNow. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. And a programming note. The markets may pause for the weekend, but the world does not. And that's why we're bringing you a new radio and TV show. Bloomberg This Weekend is looking beyond the daily headlines to the bigger themes driving politics, business, and culture. Join David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo for smart conversations and in-depth interviews that help make sense of the week that's been and what comes next. Saturdays and Sundays from 7 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, TV, and the Bloomberg Business app. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. There are more calls for Republican Congressman Tony Gonzalez of Texas to step down. It comes amid questions about whether he had an extramarital affair with a staffer who died by suicide last year. Fellow Republican Florida Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna.
I think that Tony Gonzalez should not be seeking re-election. I think that this is a gross reflection of everything wrong with Washington, and it's not just on the Republican side, it happens on the Democrat side, and I'm thinking about potentially bringing forward a censure next week for Tony Gonzalez.
The congressman said he had no plans to resign following a meeting with House Speaker Mike Johnson. Last week's deadly shooting during a youth hockey game in Rhode Island has claimed a third life, whose daughter and grandson were also killed. Pawtucket police say Gerald Dorgan, who had been in critical condition, has died from his injuries. The mayor of Pawtucket says, "We are heartbroken to learn that another life has been lost as a result of last Monday's senseless shooting at Lynch Arena." The NYPD continues to investigate a huge snowball fight at Washington Square Park in Manhattan Sunday, where officers were seen being pelted with snowballs. City Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch called the behavior disgraceful and criminal and vowed to continue the investigation. New York Mayor Zoran Mamdani says he has no plans to limit organized snowball fights within the city, but says he has seen the videos.
I've said time and time again that having seen these videos, to me it was a snowball fight that got out of hand, and it should be treated accordingly.
Mayor Mamdani says he appreciates the NYPD's work during the winter weather. Celebration of Life services begin today in Chicago for civil rights activist and former presidential candidate, the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jackson, who died on February 17th at age 84, will lie in repose at Rainbow Push headquarters through tomorrow. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Cameron.
Thanks, Michael. Time now for our Bloomberg Sports Update, and for that, we bring in John Stashower.
Thanks, Karen. Marquee game in the NBA. Oklahoma City at Detroit. They've got the two best records. The Thunder played without 5 of their 6 top scorers, and the Pistons won 124-116. Jalen Duren and Kane Cunningham both scored 29 points. 10th straight win for San Antonio, who's only 2 games behind the Thunder. The Spurs won in Toronto. James Harden, who was just traded to Cleveland, has a broken thumb. He could be out for a while. College basketball in the Big East. UConn blew out St. John's 72-40. That's your Bloomberg Sports Update.
Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak coming up after this.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. The earnings story of the week is in the books, but the reaction to NVIDIA's latest results may still be being told. The AI chip giant did deliver a first quarter outlook that easily beat the average Wall Street estimate, but some of the most bullish investors in the AI arms race may have been left a little bit less than impressed. Joining us now is someone who's very bullish on the AI story, Dan Ives, global head of tech research at Wedbush Securities. So the top line numbers, 73% sales gain in the quarter to $68.1 billion, and the projection for this quarter, $78 billion. The stock is kind of moving a little bit higher. Your reaction to the numbers, Dan? Good morning.
Yeah, great to be here. Look, I think they were stunning numbers. And if you look, especially data center demand, 75% growth. Hey, look, I think this is a stock that's up 3 to 5% today. And I think it's one where you talk about some of the AI bubble fears. You look at what they put together. This speaks to really a CapEx super cycle that's even accelerating more than the street expected. That's going to be a huge positive for the rest of tech. I think the knee-jerk reaction here is very underestimated in terms of what I think the stock and tech's going to do from this.
So why do you think that we're not seeing that kind of more bullish reaction that you think this stock should show up in?
Mm-hmm. Look, we're in what I call like an AI ghost trade. I mean, it's been very negative sentiment that we've seen over the last month, especially from Anthropic, some of the cloud worries. And I think right now this is a guilty till proven innocent tech market. But when you look at these numbers and you look at CapEx and the story it's telling, it's that if you think about it, this is called second, third inning of the AI revolution. Market's treating it like it's 7th, 8th inning. And I think that is the key here. Me and you've talked about this over the years. Sometimes knee-jerk reactions, you go through these sort of lulls. That's what we're going through. The numbers speak for themselves.
Well, of course, the number that still hangs over this story, $650 billion from the hyperscalers on CapEx. Did Jensen Huang, the CEO, do enough in the call to assure investors that that kind of spending from its own customers is going to pay off for them?
Yeah, I think he did an excellent job talking about how the CapEx is going to pay off for NVIDIA, what that means for this next phase, specifically not just Blackwell, but Rubin. And I think you'll hear more about that at GTC in mid-March. Look, I think if there's a blemish, it's the continued theme that China is basically a goose egg right now because of the restrictions. Investors want to see China ultimately that become what I believe could be, when you think about the acceleration in incremental 5-10% growth for NVIDIA. But right now, that's in the hands of the government, given the restrictions.
In our last minute, Dan, we also got results from Salesforce, kind of a disappointing revenue forecast there. What does that mean for the software story going forward?
We saw a Workday that was down and then ultimately ended up. I think Salesforce, I think this was actually a great conference call by Benioff. Look, AI is a headwind in the near term, but this will be a tailwind. I think they're turning it around. And I think what he laid out in terms of the growth strategy should put investors at ease. And I think you combine that with NVIDIA, and it starts to fight the AI ghost trade, which has been the black cloud for Microsoft, for Oracle, for overall software.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.